So, tonight's presentation is titled Leadership Lessons from the Ice, and we're very pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Sue Stockdale, FRSGS, the first British woman to ski to the magnetic North Pole, and Sue is an executive coach, speaker, and author. So, Sue is a pioneering adventure, executive coach and author, and as the first UK woman to ski to the magnetic North Pole, has travelled over 75 countries and represented Scotland in athletics. In 2004, Sue was awarded an honorary fellowship by the Royal Scottish Geographical Society for her exploring accomplishments and work in inspiring others. Sue speaks to audiences around the world and is host of the Access to Inspiration podcast, where she has interviewed a range of guests from artists to astronauts from over 25 countries. As an executive coach, Sue helps CEOs and leaders worldwide unlock their potential and navigate change. Sue holds an MBE in entrepreneurship, a master's degree in quality management, and is the author of several books. So, Sue, over to you for tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Rob, and hello, everyone, and hello if you're watching on catch up later on. And I hope that you're going to enjoy this session where I'm going to be sharing with you some leadership lessons from the ice. Now, ice and water, of course, we have some resonance being here with the water conservators and me walking on frozen ice. Regardless of what your background is, though, I think that the journey that I'm going to share with you and the lessons that I share with you are applicable no matter what you're doing, no matter what your walk of life is, because we all are on a journey these days into facing uncertainty. The world is very uncertain, just like it's out there in the Arctic. There are hidden dangers. Often we don't know what's likely to happen next, and yet we have to survive. We have to find our way through that. And so leaders, just like explorers, must embrace that continual recalibration and change. And so to get us into the mood of thinking about the Arctic and just having a sense and a feel of what that's like, I'm going to just show you a very short video clip of being in Greenland on the ice cap. Now, the noise that you will hear is the relentless noise of the wind. And this is only 45 seconds. Imagine that you were undertaking this journey, skiing 10, 12, even longer every day, at 10, 12 hours or even longer. So just to get us into the mood of being in an alien environment that wants you dead, then here's a little clip. Now, you may be thinking as you're watching that, why would anybody want to do that? Or you may be thinking, that's like the world I inhabit every single day. It's relentless. You've got to keep going. You've got to push forward and you've got to never give up. And so it's a metaphorical sense of taking that journey into the unknown. Now, how do we survive in that uncertainty? And that is the question that I want us to consider. And I want this session this evening to be active, not passive. So whilst you're not necessarily interacting with me verbally, I'd like you to be doing something as you're listening to this. And I will be posing some questions to you, reflective questions as we go along, that may then just help you focus your thinking and take something practical away from this evening's session. So to this question then, how do we survive and maintain that, that focus in uncertainty? Well, the short answer is we minimize surprises. Now that might seem obvious, but how do we do that as human beings? And of course, it's our brain that's doing this. And it's minimizing our surprises by creating a mental model of the world based on our previous experiences and predicting what might happen in the future and then matching these two things together. And if it doesn't match, then it updates our model of the world, or it encourages us as people to change our behavior. So imagine a little bit like human beings, like a thermostat for your central heating, that if the temperature goes higher or lower, then it will automatically change. And it's a little bit like that with our brain. Now, looking ahead in our journey, the journey I undertook back in 1999 to ski across the Greenland ice cap, this visual map of our journey shows a little bit like perhaps a project plan that you work on your everyday work. You have an end point. And what is important here when we're into the unknown and facing uncertainty is to have a really clear vision of that end point, that future. Because the more clarity we have, and within a team we have the clarity of that vision, then it almost minimizes that surprise. We've got more flexibility as to how we might get there. But with no clear endpoint, then sometimes we then want to stick more clearly to an existing plan, and we may be thrown off course along the way. So our journey was starting on the west coast of Greenland, a place called Kangerlussuaq, and it would be 350 miles or more of skiing, very much all of that into the unknown. We don't know what we're going to be encountering along the way. And the points you can see on the map here were our waypoints, our ways, our milestones, just like you might have on the work that you're doing in an everyday sense as well. So the point I would make here is to not cling to the plan when we're heading into the unknown, but cling to the purpose and that end vision, allowing ourselves some flexibility. So as we're going along on our journey, we need to think about how we're going to minimize our surprises. We need to be prepared for the unknown. And that really means being opening ourselves up to feedback and continual change and adaptation. And that, I hope, will be illustrated in what I'm taking you through in this journey tonight. So here is the model that I want you to hold in your mind as you're listening. I call it the explorer's mindset. And you have these 5 areas. First of all, curiosity. Now, curiosity for me is the antidote or the opposite of judgment. And we're all in our quick lives very often quickly judging things to make decisions. That judgment can be helpful sometimes, but it can also limit our ability to be curious. So I think the number one thing is to be curious about what's out there into that unknown. The second thing is, do we have confidence and self-belief in our own capability and our team's capability if we're going along with a team? And one of the ways to do that, as I'll illustrate in a moment, is to understand who's in your team and what their strengths are, what they're bringing to the team. The third point is about tolerance of risk and uncertainty. Now, my meaning of risk may be completely different to your meaning of risk. For example, a risky action for you may be eating a yogurt out the fridge past its sell-by date. And for others, that may be completely comfortable. Another person, a risk might be cycling along the road with listening to headphones. And for somebody else, they may find that completely normal. Understanding our risk, and I'll come on to how that played out in our team, and a tool that can be used to help understand that, to help a team be more effective. Well, it's all very well having a plan, but unless we actually take action, that's when we then experiment. That's when we get learning. And during that learning, things will go wrong. So when we take action, how do we bounce back when things don't work out as expected? And that's where the final point of resilience comes in. So as you're listening to this, and if you do have a piece of paper or some way of writing down something as you're listening, maybe just think about each of those points and think, okay, how would I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10? Have I a high level of curiosity? Am I quite low in my level of confidence? How's my tolerance to risk? So you're just doing a little quick self-assessment and saying, okay, if I was developing more of an explorer's mindset to be able to get into the unknown and adapt more easily, which aspects should I focus on? And I'll come back to this at the end, but I'd then like you to hold that in mind as you listen to what I've got to say. So as we move on then, I'll tell you about our team, and you can be thinking about the team that you lead or the team that you are in. 4 of us. all from different countries, 2 men and 2 women, but with that clear purpose, that clear goal to get across to the east coast of the Greenland ice cap and to see if as a team we could achieve that. So we had a clear vision together of what we planned to do. Now, I mentioned about understanding understanding your team, which can give you confidence and self-belief. Well, our team members all came from different backgrounds. Our first member, a German called Till. Now, Till is a freelance photographer and adventurer, and he wants to get fantastic photographs out onto the ice cap. Now, that means the rest of us in the team are going to be the subjects in those photographs. And I don't know if you've ever seen a picture from a remote extreme environment like the Arctic, but people generally don't look like they're enjoying themselves. We were going to have to be the ones in those pictures. And we also had to have patience and tolerance, because that is what is driving that individual. So understanding his strength and understanding why he was there was important. The second member of the team was Jana, a Norwegian. Now, she was living and working in Greenland at the time of the expedition as a physiotherapist. So helpful local knowledge that we can bring into our team. And she had never done an expedition of a month in duration. So that was her unknown. That was her uncertainty. Could she complete the journey successfully? She'd invited another friend of hers. I didn't know these Norwegians before the expedition. This man was called Terje. Now, he's somebody I would call a Mr. Fix-It, or very practical. Any sort of problem that happens, anything that breaks down mechanically, he's got real expertise in being able to fix it. And that was a fantastic skill to have in our team. He also had a wife and 2 children back in Norway. And whilst he was enthusiastic to be on this expedition and be in the team, he was also thinking about his family and wanting to get back there as quickly as possible. That meant he'd told his wife, well, I'm fit. I think we can do this trip in 22 to 25 days. Whilst the rest of us had an expectation of 30 to 35 days. So already, before we'd even started out, there was a mismatch of expectations. Sometimes that can be an obstacle in a team if those things haven't been sorted out. And as you will hear as we went along, that was going to cause a challenge for us as well. And then I was the last member of the team. I'd done a number of polar expeditions before this one, so I viewed myself as a little bit of an expert. But I wanted to use this as a case study to see how we performed as a team in a very short space of time, not knowing each other beforehand, but going into an extreme environment and having to work together to survive, basically. Now, what I wanted to understand was, what were our strengths and our weaknesses? What were our hopes and our fears? Well, you can imagine what everybody else might be thinking about that when it's not what they're interested in. But they had to understand that was my why. So coming back to that explorer's mindset and minimizing surprises is, how much time are you spending, or do you spend, understanding who's in your team and what strengths that they have and why they're there in the first place? What do they want to get out of what they're doing? Well, we started off on our journey. We'd arrived on the west coast of Greenland only 4 days before beginning this expedition. We'd got ourselves organized in terms of equipment, but maybe not in terms of mindset. But here we were at our start point, Russell Glacier. Now, as a group, as a team, we'd signed up to 2 things together. Safety was number 1 priority, and that would be the priority in any decision making, number 1 thing to think about, and also to start and finish as friends. So something about how we were going to engage with one another. And again, when we're going into the unknown and we've got to trust our teammates, in this case, effectively with our lives, understanding more about them, understanding their why, understanding their motivation and what they were willing to commit to, helps to reduce and minimize those surprises and build a degree of trust. So off we go on our journey. Now, we're prepared to adapt, and we know that at the start, although we can see that glacier right behind us, it's not safe to just climb up that glacier. So with a bit of local knowledge, we were told about a longer route, a bit of a detour that would take us across this mountainous rocky moorland that you can see in this slide. It would take us longer, but safer to get onto the ice cap. So we had planned for that. We had our rucksacks as well as our sledges, and we operated a shuttle system until we got to the ice cap proper. But even the start of the journey there, we were facing a lot of unknowns. We planned to ski across this lake as part of that journey, but unseasonably warm temperatures had meant that the lake had melted around the edge, and we couldn't even get onto it. So now we had to make a detour again. And you can see the terrain here is not exactly flat and not exactly even. Hour 6, day 1, and the shaft on one of the sledges has broken. How motivated do you think we are now as a team? And it's those setbacks, it's that testing of resilience that really, again, can make the difference between success and failure in a team. Well, luckily, we had our Mr. Fix-It, and he was able to fashion a solution out of virtually nothing, and we were able to continue on our journey. We couldn't go back to the start. We had to continue on. But it was a salutary lesson about attention to detail. Now we get on to what I would call the most difficult part of the entire journey, the most dangerous part, the crevasse zone. Now, this is where, of course, as you look across in this slide, across the ice in front of you there, it can look fairly innocuous. But as you ski across it, that ice could give way, and there could be chasms hundreds of meters deep beneath that you could plummet to your death. So what are the crevasse zones that you face in your business, in your organization? The things that are high risk that could really cause chaos if something went wrong. And how do we still take a team? How do we still try to improve our performance and get everybody through those risky areas when there is a really high degree of uncertainty? And effectively what we have to do is we still have to take action despite all of that uncertainty. And one of the things that I always come back to is what psychologist Dr. Kevin Dutton calls the ability to decouple our emotions from behavior. And it's that ability to do things when you need to do them, even when you don't want to do them. Now, what he talks about is a concept that he calls the psychological splasher. And I'm taking us away from the ice cap here, but it's still with a water theme. Kevin Dutton talks about going into the sea or going into the water. Imagine yourself at the sea. It's a warm day and you're moving into the water. For some, they will say to themselves, I know it's going to be cold and I'm going to get all the pain over with and I'm just going to run straight into the water and have it completed and be in there as quick as I can. That's one route, taking action. Another way might be, oh, this is really cold. Oh, it's going to be so cold. And as they tiptoe into the water, they're thinking, oh, yes, it's really cold. It's really cold. And effectively, they experience more pain because they're feeling the real pain of the cold water, but also the imagined pain, which will also then double the pain effectively that they have. So I always think, don't be a psychological splasher. Move forward, even although there's difficult things that you need to face, knowing that they will be painful, but find a way to decouple your emotions from that behavior. And that's what our team had to do out there on the ice cap. And we also had to understand our attitude towards risk-taking. Now, this is a tool that I use, designed by a company called PCL. They call it the risk type compass. And this is a kind of assessment tool that any individual or team can use to understand what their attitude or propensity towards risk-taking is. And it's based on two axes here, as you can see, one called emotion and the other one called cognition. So if you take that, the two axes you can see on the right, and if you overlaid them on the compass on your left, you would see that on the emotion axis, this is about how our feelings and our intuitive responses to threat show up. So those who are more influenced by that, we could call that risk type intense. And those who are more cool, calm, and collected would be composed down there at 5 o'clock, if you looked at that as a clock face. And then if you take the other axis, the cognition axis, this is about how much we need to know. So those that like to have a lot of information, they need to know a lot in order to feel comfortable to take a risk. They would be in the prudent category. And those that are more carefree and happy to have ambiguity down there in the carefree category. Now, there's no wrong or right risk type here. These are 8 different risk types. And here you can see a descriptor for each one. And the reason that I've highlighted the one in yellow, the adventurous one, is because, no surprise, that is my risk type. And those are some words there that would describe it. So just reflect on this for yourself. the teams that you operate in or the people that you surround yourself with? Are you all of one similar risk type or are you different? So, as I said, in order to be adventurous for me, I have to want to minimize the surprises. That means I am fairly organized, doing a lot of preparation ahead of time in order for me to be adventurous. That's how it would show up for me. For others in these different risk types, they would have different ways of being. And I really love when I'm working with a team and they use this tool and get a better sense together of actually who's in the room and what is the way that risk shows up for them or how their attitudes towards risk taking. So back to our expedition. So we had to manage our risk. We had to minimize our uncertainty going through this crevasse zoned area. And of course, what do we do often is we put in a procedure or a process to minimize risk. Well, our way of doing that was to be roped up together. So the person at the front, a rope would go from their harness around their waist to their sledge to the next person and so on. And then we had to ski together, almost like a giant snake, keeping that rope as taut as possible so that if somebody falls in a crevasse, the rest of you on the surface act like a counterbalance. And that person can pull themselves out. Now, Till from our team, he'd been through a crevassed area before. He had experience, the rest of us didn't. So he'd devised a procedure for us. He'd even written it out on a card, got the card laminated, and we were to keep it in our pocket at all times so that if we did fall in a crevasse, we could pull out the card and we could follow the procedure. Now, if you're like me, I wouldn't just want to rely on a procedure written on a laminated card. I'd want to have a better sense of what it was all about. And I'd want to understand even how we navigate through this area to avoid even landing in the crevasse in the first place. And so we all wanted to learn. So the first few hours, Till, the German, was at the front and the rest of us were following along behind. Jana, the Norwegian, she got bored very quickly and she said, I'd like to learn how to lead. I'd like to go first. So Till said, okay, you go in the front, I'll go second. And what happened then for the next 10 minutes was quite amusing, but actually something that often happens when we're trying to encourage other people to learn in a high-risk environment. Is she began to move along, and all that one could hear was Till behind her shouting, go left, no, go right, no, over there. And actually, I can't believe it lasted as long as 15 minutes until she stopped, threw her ski poles down in disgust, and said, if you're so good, why don't you get back in the front? Have you ever been in a car with a backseat driver? You know what that's like. Their intent there is to support and encourage, but they can't help themselves but try and do the work for them. Till realised quickly that wasn't going to work, and he had to take a different approach. So he said, okay, I know. I'll outline some of my experience. I'll tell you what I'm looking out for, and now you carry on. And if you get to an area that's really risky, in my opinion, I'll shout stop. But then I'll ask you a question. I'll get you to think for yourself. And actually what he was doing was coaching her. He was encouraging her to think for herself, to take those steps into the unknown, to be really alert to what was around her so that she could adapt in the moment and learn. And of course, the other two of us at the back, we were eager to understand as well. So we were more alert. Now, the consequence was, yes, it took us longer to get through that crevasse zone than it might have done if we just had the expert in the front and we were following them blindly, following the procedure blindly, not thinking. But that was the way that for us that spread the risk and enabled us to manage the surprises and the uncertainty. After the crevasse zone, we got onto the ice cap proper. Now we're skiing a gradual incline uphill for the next probably 200 miles. Wind in our faces, just like you saw at the start on that video. We're now not roped up together. We're now free to ski at whatever speed we want. So you can imagine what happens then when you empower people. We've got the Norwegian thinking about his wife and 2 children. He's fit and strong. He's skiing effortlessly across the ice. Closely followed by the other Norwegian because she's very fit. She's keeping up as well. And then there's a German and half of his photography subjects are disappearing. So he's trying to keep up. And then there's the Brit at the back. And I was struggling to keep up. And I was really frustrated, but I couldn't catch up with them to tell them. So what happens then is what's going on in your head. And I began to tell myself, well, they know I'm the expert here, and they're not even going to listen to me. I can't tell them this. So I got frustration because as an expert, I wasn't being paid attention to. And then I went into victim mode. I went, oh, poor me. This is awful. They're going to throw me off the team. I can't keep up. I began to cry. But all that happened is that my goggles froze with the cold temperatures, and my tears froze in my goggles, and I couldn't see where I was going. So that wasn't working. So I gave up on that. And then I said, okay, Sue, just take the next step. Get through the next 5 minutes. Just do the best you can. Focus on what is possible. Although there's risk, there's change, there's uncertainty. How do I just maintain a degree of resilience to keep going step by step? Well, inside the tent that evening, nothing was said. And I bet you've all been in situations like that in your lives or as a leader where something's up, but nobody will talk about it. Well, next day we begin to go out again, begin to ski, and then something else happens. Terje gets a muscle strain. And what do you think my response is? Yes. Now he can slow down and go at my speed. But of course, that wasn't solving the problem. That was only selfish individual thinking. And so what that did is it precipitated us sitting down together and actually having a meaningful conversation. But before we could get to that, we had to express all our emotions. And that's the bit that often brings uncertainty. People are uncomfortable. They don't know what to do when people are emotional. But we have to get people through that. We all had to go, you're too slow, you're too fast, I can't keep up, whatever it was. All of that kind of anger and frustration came out. And then once we'd calmed down, we could actually listen to one another. And we came up with loads of ideas about how to solve this problem, the speed of skiing. And I'm sure you could think of different ways of doing it yourself. Eventually, Terje said, look, Sue, give me some of the weight from your sledge. That will free you up to ski faster. It will slow me down with my muscle strain, and we'll find a more conducive speed of skiing. Now that sounds rational, it sounds logical, doesn't it? But I resisted that. I resisted making that change because I thought it was showing that I had a weakness, that I couldn't do it. And then I just changed my mindset and I thought, what's not to like about a lighter sledge? And actually, I'm helping the entire team to succeed. So I changed my thinking from me as an individual to we as a team. And by really focusing on that, it enabled me to accept the pleasure of having a lighter sledge and skiing that little bit quicker and keeping a more consistent pace with the team. But that was the toughest lesson I learned on the entire expedition. Then we carried on from there. And of course, like any business, any organization, we need to have a way of accountability, don't we? We need to measure our progress, measure our success. We use GPS, of course, out on the ice. And our measurements were telling us that as we skied every day, a minimum currently of around 22 kilometers a day, which seemed like it was at our physical limit, we were going too slow. We would run out of food before we reached the east side of the ice cap. It was time for reframing our thinking. And we worked out it would have to go a minimum of 25 kilometers. So that's 3 kilometers more per day, less than 2 miles. Now that sounds fine, sitting here in the comfort of our homes and our offices. But when you're at your physical limit, your mental limit, you just don't know how you can keep going. How do you think, oh yeah, just do another 2 miles a day? So we had to reframe again our thinking. And up until that point, we had skied for 8 hours a day, 1 hour at a time, a 5-minute break, another hour at a time, another 5-minute break. And that was our process, 8 sessions of 1 hour. So we reframed and said, okay, we know we can do 8 sessions. So let's now focus on sessions, not time. Oh, and by the way, each session will become an hour and a quarter. So in effect, we were now skiing for 10 hours, but we didn't focus on time. We only focused on sessions. And that subtle but important reframing enabled us to push through into that unknown. to manage that discomfort and achieve more than we had really imagined before that. And that was a powerful thing that helped us to keep going. Another thing that helps us to minimize surprises and manage uncertainty is to get information from outside. Now, that is not something that we thought we'd find in the middle of the ice cap. And yet we spotted a team. Halfway through the expedition, this was day 11, we spotted this team coming from the east to the west. They happened to be Norwegian, and they were going on dog sleds. So, of course, we could have a conversation with them. Now, they gave us two useful pieces of information. They told us that the temperatures were going to get colder, or they had experienced cold temperatures at the higher altitude on the east coast. And it was so cold, two of the dogs had died, and they had such strong winds in a bad storm. And the other thing was they told us that one of those milestones that we were heading for, Dai 2, which is a disused air station, an early warning station from the Cold War, that there were people there and that they'd given them fresh bread. Now, those two important bits of information, first of all, after eating dehydrated meals for 2 weeks, the idea of real food was a great motivator. And also with an expectation that things could get worse, we anticipated that. And in our sledges up until that point, we had a second set of tent poles for each of the tents. So from that day onward, just in case, we used to pitch our tent with a double set of tent poles. And that's sometimes what we do when we're thinking about possibilities in the future. We plan the what if, and we let's hope that it will never happen. But sure enough, 2 days later, day 14 for us, this place, Dai 2, suddenly comes into view. And it's a pretty big building. It's disused, there's nothing inside it anymore, no people. But behind it, there were people from the National Science Foundation. And they weren't expecting visitors, but they had made a homemade apple pie, would you believe? And that was a great reward for us, having got 120 miles across the ice cap. But it had taken us half of the time to ski a third of the distance. So something again was going to have to change as we went into the unknown. Next day is the first day the wind's behind us. And in our sledges, all of that time, again, preparing for what could be, we had kites. And we can ski a long distance using kites. In fact, one team I know have skied over 60 miles in one day and not traveled anywhere for the 6 days previously until they got the right wind conditions. So sometimes it's about how you experiment and innovate. Well, we tried using our kites to find that they were even slower than what we were in our speed of skiing. And it was about that preparedness to experiment, but to give ourselves a limitation and say, okay, we'll only travel for X number of hours. And if they don't work, we'll ditch that idea and go back to what we know. But we do often have to experiment to try new things and see if they will work and take us forward in a different way. But now our sledges were getting lighter. We were getting to the highest point of the ice cap. We were getting fitter and stronger. And every day we used to build a snow wall, just like you can see on the left-hand side of this slide. Every day we'd build that wall with the expectation that if the wind got strong, it would give us some protection to have our tent behind that wall. But we've done this every day and the wind doesn't get stronger. And so on this occasion, this is day 24, we have skied for 10 hours and we're absolutely exhausted. And so now we almost are a little bit complacent. And of course, when we get complacent, things go wrong. So we half-heartedly build that snow wall, just desperate to get inside our tents, to be honest, and hoping that, like every other day, the wind won't get stronger. But of course, those Norwegians that we met had got it right. We also encountered a horrendous storm up there at the highest point of the ice cap. So strong that when you were in one tent here, seeing the other tent next to it, and somebody was shouting from one side to one tent to the other, you just couldn't hear them because of the noise of the wind outside blowing up all the ice crystals. It was so difficult to even travel from one tent to the next. In the end, we all spent 36 hours, a day and a half, all crushed up like sardines inside one tent, just praying that those extra set of tent poles that we had put in when the conditions were calm would enable that tent to survive. And we just, again, hoped and prayed that that snow wall that we had built would give us some sort of protection. And that's when you do face those really difficult, challenging situations. But yes, they are a surprise. Yes, there's a high degree of uncertainty. But because we tested ourselves before that, because we'd taken in information from others, we were willing to experiment, we were willing to make mistakes, get feedback, and keep experimenting to try and get as quickly and as safely across the ice cap. It meant that when we got to this difficult situation, it wasn't quite as frightening and scary as it could have been had we not been taking all of these risks beforehand. In the end, after those 36 hours, when we did manage to get back outside the tents, those snow walls had completely disappeared. And I think it was just sheer good luck that our tent remained standing. Or maybe it was good planning and preparation from having those extra tent poles in many days earlier. And I think we do have to look up and out in our organizations, in our teams, and in our lives to get in new information around us, to take in the things that could be a small snippet, a small signal of something that will be an indication of change. But if we're too busy focused on the plan and not focused on the purpose, we may miss those indicators, those signals of something that is going to be really important for us later on. Eventually, as we did come out the tents, and you can see the mountains of East Greenland in the distance on this slide, that gave us a sense of hope and a sense of we can make it. It's possible that we'll get to the end. And so we came eventually 4 days later to the edge of the ice cap in East Greenland. It was one of the most wonderful days I'll recall. 40 kilometers of downhill skiing, a light tailwind, temperatures now at +5 degrees rather than -40. And I would trade probably all of those previous 27 days of tough, difficult, physically and mentally demanding days to re-experience that wonderful day. And I got the ultimate accolade from the Norwegians, who actually said I looked like I could do cross-country skiing by this point. And given I had not had much experience of it before, I thought that was a little bit of an acknowledgement from them, a bit of recognition. And that was it, 28 days it had taken us. And how were we successful? Well, I think we did sign up to those values, those ways of working together. We were willing to trust one another, we were willing to learn, and we were willing to adapt. And so coming back to my points at the start about how do we go through complexity, how do we go through change? And it's not about eliminating uncertainty. I think as a leader, or as leading yourself even, is how do we get better at predicting what's going to happen? And that means being aware, being present, being noticing what's going on, and not just being so driven by our plan in front of us. And then having the ability to adapt to that, what we're noticing, and helping other people to be comfortable to do that as well. So finally, my question to you at the start was, what are those aspects of an explorer's mindset that maybe your areas of strength or the ones that you'd like to develop? And so given that managing uncertainty and minimizing surprises is about experimentation, that's my final invitation to you this evening is, which area here would you like to develop? Would you like to step forward and perhaps practice more or get more aware in how you manage it for yourself, so that you can continue to be ready to face uncertainties, to adapt and to survive no matter what uncertainties you may face in the future? And if you do want some inspiration as well, one of the books, I've written many books, but this one is particularly about my polar adventures, then there's lots of examples and stories in there that will help you to get other ideas about how you can be successful and how you can step into the unknown to explore you and your team's potential. So thank you for listening this evening, and I hope that allows us some time for questions at the end here, and that you've enjoyed what you've had to hear.